A for loop is not the only way that you can loop through items repeatedly in JavaScript. But before looking at other ways of creating loops, I want to look at an important data structure, the array. An array is just a sequentially ordered list. You can think of it as a sort of a set of slots in which a fixed number of items can be stored. Now, in JavaScript, unlike some other languages, an array can contain different types of data all mixed up in the single array. So, for example, one array could have some integers and also some strings in the adjacent slots. An array can be written as a series of data items separated by commas and enclosed between a pair of square brackets. Here, for example, in the arrayindex.html sample document, you'll see I've declared an array of 4 integers, and I've assigned that array to the variable called myArray. Now, each item in an array can be referenced by its index. The first item in the array, and this doesn't matter what the item is, whether it's an integer or a string or some other data type, it has the index of 0. The last item is at the index given by the length of the array, -1. So in this example, as there are 4 items in the array, its length is 4, and so the last index, that is, the index of the integer, which happens here to be 4, is actually 3. It goes index 0, index 1, index 2, index 3. And I can obtain the value stored at any particular index by placing the index number between square brackets. Here, for example, my array, and I put the index number 2 between square brackets, that gets the item at that index, which in this case is the integer 3. And I can assign a new value in much the same way by indexing into the array given the index number. So again, I've indexed into position 2, and I've inserted into that position the string 3. And you can see the result when you load up the web page. So here you can see item at myArray index 2 is 3. That's the item that was there at the start. Then I indexed into the array and replaced that item, that is the item at index 2, with a string 3. And so now when I display the item at index 2, it shows me the string 3. Now here are some examples of some other types of loops. You'll find these in the arrays and loops.html sample file. First, at the top, I've declared 3 arrays. One is an array of integers, one is an array of strings, and the third is a mixed array. It's got an integer, it's got a string, and in fact it's got a nested array. And that's a good example of how you can mix quite different data types in a single array. Now here's a familiar looking for loop. It's the sort that we've been dealing with before, so it declares a variable, a counter variable, initializes it to 0, then the next part says run this loop while this expression is true, while I is less than numArray.length, and end the loop when the expression becomes false, and finally I add 1 to the counter variable on each turn through the loop. Now let's look down below this, and here's another sort of loop. This also begins with for, but you can think of this as a for-in loop. This iterates through the elements in an array without the need for an indexing variable. I don't have to say var I equals 0 and then increment that variable on each turn through the loop. This sort of loop starts with the keyword for, then there is a pair of parentheses, and inside these parentheses it defines a variable. For example, as here I've got the variable s, and this is assigned a new item each time the loop executes. Then comes the keyword in, then the name of a collection, and it's this collection which is being processed within the loop. For example, here I've got the string array, that's my array of strings. And each turn through the loop, s is assigned one of the strings from the array. Now with this sort of loop you don't have to worry about a terminating condition. I don't have to say perform this as long as I is less than a certain number, for example, because the loop will execute as long as there are more items to be processed in the array. Here's another sort of loop. This is a while loop. And this is useful when you want to execute some code for what may be an uncertain number of times. So that is, while some test condition remains true. Here the loop says while counter is less than string array dot length. Do this code. And here, as long as the value of the counter variable is less than the length of string array, the code in the loop executes. And there's another sort of while loop, a do while loop. Now in the first while loop, the code would never execute at all if the value of counter was the same as the length of string array at the outset. In that case, the test condition would fail immediately and all the code would be bypassed. But with this alternative syntax, the condition is tested at the end of the loop rather than at the beginning. And here the loop begins with do, then the code comes between curly brackets, and it ends with while, followed by the test condition. And with this sort of loop, the code always executes at least once. So let's see this page in a web browser. And here you can see the results of the for loop, that's the simple for loop. Then there's the for in loop down here, the while loop, and the do while loop. Let's look first at the while and do while loops. Well, they seem to produce the same results. But what happens if I change the counter to 3? So its initial value is 3. And let's look what the test condition is. The test condition says while counter is less than string array dot length. Well, the length is 3. So let's see if that changes the results we get. I'll refresh my browser. And look what's happened. With the simple while loop, nothing is displayed because the code never executes. The test condition fails right away and that bypasses all the code. But with the do while loop, remember the test condition is only evaluated right at the end. So the code executes once, irrespective of whether or not the test condition evaluates to true or false. So in this case, it attempts to write the value found at the index 3 of string array. Well, there is no value there. There are only 3 items, and remember the last item is always 1 less than the length of the string array. So if I attempt to get index 3's item, there is no index 3. And so it returns undefined. So that's an example of the subtle difference between those two types of while loop. Now, there's one thing I haven't looked at, and that's what's going on in this other for loop right at the top here. And you can see I've got this keyword break. Break is a rather uncompromising way of ending a loop. It really goes right out of the loop, it breaks out of the loop, no matter what is going on. And it's something I wouldn't really advise you to use as a matter of course. There are times when it's useful to use, but generally it's better to terminate a loop according to some condition which is clearly set in the loop. For example, one of the conditions we've tested, such as I is less than numarray.length. But in this occasion, I'm doing some other sort of test in the loop, and I've decided that if I find that there's a string at any position in the array that evaluates to the string 2 TWO, then I want to stop processing the array and I'm going to break right out of it. So even though, if you look at the string array, you can see that there are 3 strings, 1, 2, and 3, and that according to the test in my for loop, I should really iterate through all of those strings, so I should end up printing 1, 2, and 3. This condition here that tests whether the string 2 is found leads to break occurring. Break smashes its way right out of that loop, and so the string 3 is never printed. And you can see that is in fact what happens here. So, as I say, that's something to be used with great caution. There are times when you might need to break out, but it's generally better to stick to the logic, the clear logic that is described in the test condition that controls the loop. So, in short, that's a quick summary of the most common ways of repeating actions in JavaScript.